Detect a quorum. Thanks everybody for being here. So pursuant to Tennessee chapter number 300, time is reserved for public comment period on legislative items appearing before the committee. And I believe we do have two speakers here. So if you've signed up for public health and safety, do we have a list of who they are? Oh, I have it right here. I apologize. Gina Coleman, are you here with us today? Yeah. Thank you, Gina. Gents, if you could make way to the podium, and thank you, Ms. Coleman. State name, address in 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Gina Coleman, 160 Haynes Park Drive. Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's always good to come before you. I came before you in November 2020 and told you about a problem we had on Haynes Park Drive. And we had bought our security cameras, and we needed your approval to implement them. We have had them for the last 3 years. We've paid $12,000. We pay $4,000 each year for our LPR security cameras. They're working. Of course, we need the neighbor. The neighbor is essential. We have to do a police report when we have a crime that's happened. They call the police department. The police come out and take the report. We own our footage. We manage our footage. That doesn't go to anyone but us, the neighborhood association. So we have gone door to door. We have talked to everybody we could. We've gotten the information out. We have done our due diligence to make sure our neighbors know that we have LPR cameras, but it's a safety issue because we were having a safety problem. All this verbiage I hear sounds like you distrust your police department. I have been into this thing for 20 years. We started out with no parking and standing signs on Haynes Park. We went before the Traffic and Parking Commission with our council lady back then, Brenda Gilmore, and we accomplished that goal. Now it's time for the technology. You got the cell phones. The criminal has the access to cell technology. Now we have to go to the next level to use the technology. This is a pilot. The pilot worked. Now, what do? Do something with this information. This is a one-time opportunity, council members, that you have to make a difference. Go out with a bang.
Thank you, Ms. Coleman. Appreciate you being here. Next, we have Ifani De Silva. I apologize in advance if I didn't get your name right, but please tell me, how do you pronounce your name?
No, you low-key ate that, Jeff. Thanks.
Very good. Name, address, in 2 minutes. Thank you for being here.
No problem. My name is Ifani De Silva. I live off Murfreesboro Pike. I'm a member of Turk Votes and the Equity Alliance, but I'm here today in my personal capacity to reiterate my opposition to this resolution aiming to approve full implementation of license plate readers LPR technology. First and foremost, dozens of my community members, organizations, and leaders came before you and time again in opposition to LPR technology. And we are here once again today with the data and the statistics proving exactly what we warned you against. Plain and simple, LPRs are disproportionately harming Black and Brown communities, as shown in recently released data from the Metro Nashville Community Oversight Board. A disproportionate number of hits were overwhelmingly concentrated in predominantly non-white and low-income areas. This over-policing leads to the detention and deportation of Black and Brown people, tears families apart, damages our local economy, and harms the fabric of our communities. Once the infrastructure is set in place, there's no knowing what external vendors or parties will do to obtain the data. ICE, for example, will stop at nothing to obtain the data, as we have seen in several cities time and time again across the country. There is no amendment or restriction that will stop them. I ask you all to vote no on this resolution and allow the community time to hear and learn about the true impacts of this program, especially since you now have personal, community, and analytical testimony laid out in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here. Okay, so those were our two public comment speakers. Thank you again. So I'm going to run through a consent agenda here, and if anything needs to come off, please let me know. We'll begin with RS 2023-2361. Rhoton and Syracuse appropriates $28,250 from the Community Safety Fund for a grant to Rocketown of Middle Tennessee for Napier and Sudicum community safety programs. RS 2023-2362. Rhoton, Syracuse, and Welsh appropriates $59,442 from the Community Safety Fund for a grant to the Rafa Institute for Napier and Sudicum community safety programs. RS 2023-2363. Councilmember Toombs amends resolution RS 2022-1307, which appropriated funding from the American Rescue Plan Act to the Community Safety Partnership Fund to support evidence-based community solutions to interpersonal violence. RS 2023-2376, Rhoton, Syracuse, and Hancock, approves a grant from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to the Metropolitan Board of Health to update emission inventory software for the ongoing collection of data on ambient air concentrations for fine particulate matter in Nashville, Tennessee. RS 2023-2377, Rhoton, Syracuse, and Welsh, approves Amendment 2 to a grant from the Tennessee Department of Human Services to the Metropolitan Board of Health to conduct immunization record audits for child care centers, drop-in centers, and group child care homes to ensure the safety and well-being of children and families in Tennessee. RS 2023-2379, Rhoton and Syracuse, approves a grant from the Tennessee Office of Criminal Justice Programs to the Office of Family Safety to offset funding reductions in the current contract to ensure the continued provision of services in Nashville's family safety centers. RS 2023-2380, Rhoton and Syracuse, approves amendment number 1 to a sole source contract between the Metropolitan government. Actually, that is not going to be on consent. So I'm moving on then to three late items that can be on consent. First, late filed resolution, Syracuse and Evans appropriates $48,000 from the Community Safety Fund for a grant to United Neighborhood Health Services, doing business as the Neighborhood Health for Napier and Sudicum community safety programs. Second, late filed resolution, Syracuse and Evans appropriates $20,000 from the Community Safety Fund for a grant to Creative Girls Rock for Napier and Sudicum community safety programs. And the third, late filed resolution, a resolution appropriating a total of $1 million from the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, acting by and through the Metropolitan Health Department to Nashville Health, and authorizing the Metropolitan Health Department to enter into a grant contract with Nashville Health for a Healthy Nashville study. Any of those need to come off of consent? Seeing none, I have a motion and a second. All in favor of the consent agenda? Any against? Abstentions? All right, thank you all. We have 8 here, 8 in favor, 0 against on the consent agenda. I'm going to go back to, before we take up 2342, let's go back to 2380. RS 2380, Rhoton and Syracuse, approves amendment number 1 to a sole source contract between the Metropolitan Government and FUSIS Inc. to increase the value of the contract and extend the term of the contract. All right, I have a motion and a second. In Budget and Finance, we indefinitely deferred this, and I would actually move for an indefinite deferral. Second. And Councilmember, did you want to speak to that? Councilmember Porterfield.
You beat me to the chair punch. I was going to ask for an indefinite deferral, so I'll second it.
Thank you. Just a brief explanation. This is a more complex bill than it needs to be on the very last meeting of the term. So we are going to let the next council deal with that. So all in favor of the indefinite deferral? Aye. Against? Any abstention? You recommend indefinite deferral. 8 in favor, 0 against. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Well, back to RS 2023-2342, Syracuse, Johnson, Gamble, and others, approves full implementation of license plate reader technology by the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department following the July 22nd, 2023 conclusion of the pilot implementation. Any motion? Second. Thank you very much. I do have an amendment. I have a motion, and I have a second. And I'll offer a brief explanation here on this amendment. So the amendment does 3 things. it clarifies that this isn't the end of the road here, that there are going to be, the next council will have to take up 2 more resolutions, one for procurement and one for appropriations. So just to give better clarity and transparency on the process from here on out, should we pass this tonight. It confirms that the eventual vendor contracts have to comply with federal, state, and local law and MNPD policies. It also includes a termination clause that kicks in if there's credible indication or breach of an unintended disclosure. So it gives greater clarity to that process. Finally, the amendment provides that MNPD policies will require consultation with community advisory groups in each precinct to determine where the fixed LPR devices go. So the intent, and I may have said in the transportation a little bit as not as clear. The intent is to be as inclusive as possible to community groups to be engaged in this process. So that's the explanation of the amendment. Any discussions on the amendment? Councilmember Porterfield, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to, I don't want to rehash everything that we stated in the previous committee, but for individuals that are in here now that were not a part of that previous committee, I first want to thank you, Chair, for bringing this amendment and working hard to try to be inclusive. I think it is important that it's not enough to say we're not excluding community groups. We need to intentionally be inclusive of community groups. And with that, you know, the recommendation is that this conversation is not moving forward without insight and being in tandem with the community oversight or the community review board, as well as TURC and other organizations that have a vested interest in representing constituency groups that will be impacted by LPR. So I appreciate you for bringing this amendment, Chair. I am open to the conversation and you know, figuring out how I'm going to vote on it. But I do think that it is important that we are being intentional about including those groups. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this? I'll ask our legal director here. In Transportation Committee, we did discuss about bringing an amendment on the floor to include the Community Review Board to this. So can we get some clarity on how that procedurally would work? Is it here or just on the full floor? Oh, I guess I have to turn your console. Yes, there we go. Thank you.
Yes, so in transportation, it was discussed that there be an amendment presented on the floor that would include the Community Review Board as part of the precinct community advisory groups, that they would be invited to participate with those groups. Procedurally, the committee, the transportation, the committee approved the amendment as presented to you in committee, and then the resolution as amended. Both of those things were approved, and then the rules would need to be suspended to bring the amendment as amended with the inclusion of the CRB language on the floor this evening.
Okay, so I just wanted to level set that would be the procedure, and that's something that I would do then on the floor tonight. Okay. Any other comments, questions on the amendment? Okay. All in favor? Yes. Against? Abstentions? So, one abstention. So the amendment is recommended 7 in favor, 0 against, 1 abstention. All right, so we have the resolution as amended. Can I get a motion on the resolution as amended, first and a second? Discussions on the resolution as amended. Councilmember Sepulveda.
Thank you, Chair. I had a couple of questions that I didn't ask at the last meeting, at the last committee meeting. So this is for MMPD, specifically about the workload. So how did officer workload change during the pilot period is a question. And how does MMPD anticipate full LPR deployment impacting officer workload? And then how does MMPD anticipate responding to the increase of workload?
Deputy Chief Gilder. Whoop. Try again.
All right.
Oh, one more time.
All right, Chris Gilder,
There
Metro
we go.
Police Department. With respect to workload, I don't think there was an increase on workload because the way the program operates is the alert comes in, the dual verification process occurs, and then the analyst looks for available units that are not on calls for service who can respond. So if officers are tied up on other calls for service, then there just simply wasn't anybody available to respond to it. Again, it's part of a precision policing mechanism. So, we're able to pinpoint where their officers aren't having to, they're not conducting traffic stops and wondering, is this a stolen car? Is this not a stolen car? The system is telling us ahead of time that it is. I would argue there's some benefit to that with respect to workload because we're able to coordinate and take that person into custody on kind of on our terms, I guess, if you will. And so probably a net positive effect on workload, but I don't have hard numbers. I didn't conduct an analysis of that.
What percentage of hits were not responded to because we didn't have an officer readily available?
I'd have to go back and look at the data that was supplied to council each time included the number of verified hits, and then you have the number of arrests and stops that were occurring. So that data was supplied. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Thank you. Does the Community Oversight Board have that data?
Yes, because it's available on our website. Everybody who has access to the internet has that data.
Yes, sorry. I was asking
Oh,
the
I'm
Community Oversight Board if they could. Thank you.
Yes, hello again, everyone. Dylan DePriest, data analyst with the Community Oversight Board.
What percentage of LPR hits did we have that weren't responded to by an officer?
So if we once again reference the table on, let's see. Actually, so let's look at the table 1 on page 3. So LPR category values. That first category, verified hits, those are all the hits that the license plate readers scanned and MNPD officers have verified as real hits. So there were 1,316 of those. Of those 1,300 verified hits, 79 led to vehicle stops. So roughly there was a little over 1,250 or so verified hits that did not lead to any vehicle stops.
Okay, but we don't have the number of hits that weren't reported to specifically because we had no officers available?
No, unfortunately, based on the data dashboard, I don't have access to that information.
Thank you. I guess my concern would be that if we fully implement LPRs to the level that MNPD is talking about, in which we had multiple LPR cameras located near each other in order to have a more, a clear map as to where the vehicles are going. My question would be, how many more officers would we need to hire to respond to all the hits? And then how many vacancies are we still currently trying to fill? I guess that's just a general question. And then my second question is, per Metro Code, LPRs are supposed to be equitably distributed throughout Nashville, yet LPR placement appears to be concentrated in predominantly non-white, low-income areas. Can we describe the thought process behind this, and how will MNPD reassure the public that LPRs are not being used for general targeted surveillance?
Chief Gilder, did you?
So as we explained in the presentation to council, which is the PowerPoint's available, it's online too if anybody's interested. But the way we came about selecting these locations, crime analysts looked at crime data for last year. They looked at Part 1 violent crimes. So that's reported violent crimes like robberies, rapes, murders, aggravated assaults. They took that data and they condensed it into a density map, a crime density map, which creates hotspots. It shows where crimes are occurring in larger numbers. And then we overlaid the major and collector streets with that data, and we provided that map, and you can see it, it's online, and you will see that the LPR camera placement was placed within those hotspots. You'll see them in those hotspots, and that's how they ended up in the locations that they did.
I guess my question is, after the report of driving while black, MMPD restructured the way that they conduct stops, right? And so now we're running across the issue where the majority of these cameras have been located in areas that are predominantly non-white, low income. So how would we address that concern that the majority of the LPRs are located in these places?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that the LPR is only alerting on stolen cars, stolen plates, and wanted persons and missing persons. So there's not a human factor there making a determination about should I stop this car, should I not stop this car. It's alerting us to the fact that this car is already in NCIC and is wanted.
I appreciate that. I think the concern is that it feels like these groups are being overly surveilled, and if we are trying to build more of a relationship and a trust factor within the department, how would we address it at that point? Would it be these groups that we're talking about adding into the way we deploy the placement of LPRs?
Yeah, so community input, I think, is important, which is, I think, the goal the chief set with respect to the community advisory groups. And, you know, again, I think what else is important to keep in mind, kind of in relation to your prior question, is that on these major collector streets, these aren't neighborhood surface streets. You know, if you look at the data, the number of reads overall, about 71 million, that ends up being about 500,000 reads coming in and out. These are streets that people use to travel in and out of the city. So it's not just necessarily people that live in those areas where the crime hotspot is. That's just where the crime is occurring, and that's why the cameras were placed there.
Okay. I have more questions, but I'll allow other committee members.
Is there any other questions from committee members or non-committee members? Councilmember Porterfield, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I will piggyback off of my colleague's last question here, and then I have several questions as well. Thank you. You may want to get a little comfortable. I got a lot of questions here.
Yes, ma'am.
So my first question is with regards to the explanation that you just gave, Councilmember Sepulveda. The data that we see with regards to vehicle stops, like we see vehicle stops are happening all over, outside of LPRs, they're happening all over the city.
Sure.
But when LPRs are disproportionately placed in communities of color and low-income communities, would it not be logical that you have more hits there because that's where the cameras are? But if vehicle stops are all around the city, crime is happening all around the city, not just in low-income communities and communities of colors, right?
I would agree that crime is occurring all around the city. What I would also state is that if you look at the map we supplied, those Part 1 violent crimes are occurring primarily in those hot spots, which is where the LPRs were chosen to be placed. And yes, traffic stops are occurring all over, but they're occurring for various things. It could be your tags are expired. Could be you didn't use a turn signal. It could be you were speeding. These LPRs were placed to capture and address issues with respect to, like I said, those major Part 1 violent offenses, homicides, rapes, robberies, burglaries, things like that.
Okay. In the presentation that you all gave us, it said that LPR hits pulls for things that you all don't move on. Do you remember that? Can you give an explanation of that?
Yeah, there's a couple items that alert. I'll let Chief Blair address that.
So all it's hitting on, right, 71 million vehicles went through these LPRs, right? 112 people were arrested. It's only hitting on stolen cars, stolen plates, wanted individuals, and then we check to see if there's extradition. If there's not extradition, there's no reason to stop that person. and then order of protections, and then the sex offender registry. Order of protection, sex offender registry, we didn't do anything with those because it's not illegal to drive on a major street. They're not violating that.
Are they used for amber or silver alerts?
Yes, they're used for amber and silver alerts during the program. I don't think we had any during the 6 months. Usually we have, and when the 6 month period, we'll have 7 or 8 of those a year. And I think this period we didn't have any at all.
Okay, thank you. On average, how long does it take from an LPR hit until you have a suspect detained?
That's a great question. We didn't start a clock to time it or anything like that.
So there's no data to support?
Now, you have an hour to work on it based on the ordinance, and usually within that hour it's taken care of, but I don't have a specific time frame for each one that it was taken. I just don't have that data.
Can I address it? Yeah. So I think to your question, that's going to depend upon the facts, right? So the hit verification process occurs relatively quickly. In fact, we posted a video to the website to help illustrate that. And it's about under a minute, usually, for the dual verification to occur. And then it's going to depend on whether or not anybody's available to dispatch that alert hit to someone in the field. And then I think it's going to depend upon, as Chief Blair spoke to before, are we able to continue to locate that video? You know, what we learned in the pilot was that when the LPRs are placed in a series along a road, we were able to get a direction of travel and figure out, okay, this car's headed this way, and we were more successful in locating and intercepting that vehicle. And so I think if we have, you know, a good direction of travel and people available to respond, it's probably a relatively quick apprehension process. If not, then you may spend a little more time searching the area looking for the vehicle. So I think it's going to depend upon those factors.
Thank you. Did we, I believe Councilwoman Sepulveda may have asked this, but do we know how often we had someone available to respond?
I don't think we tracked the data with respect to how often people were 10-8. I will say available. I will say that with the issue of verified hits, keep in mind, too, we had multiple cars that hit repeatedly on LPRs. So when you see, you know, 3,000 verified hits, those include, you know, some car that may have hit an LPR 10 different times. So they're not all unique individual hits of different vehicles.
Okay, thank you. Do you know how many misreads there have been?
There were 0 misreads because the process that we utilize doesn't allow so the alert comes in, one operator reviews it, confirms it against NCIC. Operator number 2 does the same process. They confer and agree, and only until that process occurs do they notify any police officer in the field.
And how long does that process take?
Usually less than a minute.
Okay, thank you. And then regarding private LPRs, what are the policies and procedures for assessing and storing data from them?
We don't receive any private LPRs, and I would defer to whether we would even be allowed to do that without this ordinance passing.
You all, okay.
We do not have access to a private LPR system.
Okay, thank you for stating it for the record. There's a camera at Bell and Murfreesboro Road. How many arrests from drag racing have resulted from LPR hits at that intersection?
Do you know that?
So that intersection right there had the most hits of any LPR, but it's there by itself. So, you know, in that general area there, once it hits, you're already 5 to 10 seconds behind the clock. That car can go anywhere. So it's very hard to find cars there. Rest of that specific location to drag racing, I don't have that answer. I can look and try to find for you. That's not a problem, but I don't have it right now.
Okay, yeah, that would be really helpful because when this conversation started, when Councilwoman Stiles first brought LPRs up this council term, it was initially to address the issues of drag racing, and we were told in our committee at that time that LPRs would not help with drag racing. So we have since been told that they would help with drag racing. So I think it's really important that we have some data to support which version is the truth. Is there a policy to address vulnerable communities from the LPR program?
So the LPR just reads a tag and a letter. That's all it reads. So in any one of the quadrants, I broke it down in the data there, we estimate how many reads for the entire program, cars were going through there, and only 112 people were arrested. I think in quadrant A, I remember 21 million tags were read, and only 112 people were interacted. That means everyone else went about their life. And they never had an interaction with the police with an LPR.
Right, I understand that. I believe you all said 71 million plates were read, which resulted in 112 arrests, which, I mean, you can argue, I know the the information we're being told is that the program is successful, but I mean, I could argue that 71 million plates read and that's only 112 arrests. I don't know how successful that is, but that's neither here nor there. With regards to the cameras being disproportionately placed in minority communities and low-income communities, I restate the question. What is the policy to address vulnerable communities, to protect those communities?
So I think that's what we've discussed tonight, is the fact that we would rely on community input, in particular the community advisory groups, which, as Chief Drake described, are a pretty diverse group of individuals, and some of the council members are involved in these groups as well. So community input.
Okay, thank you. And I know there was some conversation in the last committee, but for the sake of this committee, what's the price tag on LPRs? How much is this going to cost our taxpayers?
So as we discussed in the last committee, we're in the middle of a procurement process, and we can't discuss vendors. We can't discuss, we don't know pricing yet. What we have done is look at other communities to see what the average price of LPRs are. Chief Blair's research has found that, generally speaking, $3,000 per camera is about the cost. And so the question was, how many cameras are we looking to deploy? And our analysis was that utilizing the number that we used for the pilot program, which was 117? 117 would be a good number to start with. So you can extrapolate that from there. Again, that's all going to be contingent upon what vendors are selected and what the pricing is in the contract, which, again, I just, being in the middle of a procurement, I can't get into.
Okay, thank you. That's just kind of hard to approve something we don't have a good idea of the price of, unless it's a stadium. But I did have one final question. There was someone that I spoke with, a resident in Jolton, who talked about the number of stolen cars that come from other counties that come through their community, but there's no LPRs in their area, but all of the LPRs that are focused in their quadrant are all in the Bordeaux area, North Nashville area, and just the concern that from her as a Jolton resident, that it was not placed in an equitable fashion. So moving forward, what is the plan to make sure that LPRs are not only put in non-white, low-income communities?
Yeah, so again, the deployment for the pilot project was very limited. I mean, the rules that were implemented in the ordinance dictated that, with respect to how we can purchase LPRs and can't get donations of LPRs. So there was the way that the program was conducted is the vendors that were involved provided the equipment. It's not to us. They put it up, provided it for the purposes of the pilot, then they took it back. So we had a limited number of cameras to be able to deploy. Like I said, we utilized the Part 1 crime hotspots. I think the discussions that we've had is that, we're absolutely interested in deploying to other areas across the county. Again, I think it's driven by data. It's driven by community input. So yeah, if there's an area of the county that has a large number of stolen vehicles that are passing along major collector streets, that's absolutely an area that we would be interested in looking at.
So who would she reach out to? Because when she reached out directly to the MPD officer in her community, she was advised that, I won't say that. Who should she reach out to?
So
that concern?
Is she going to reach out to either one of us? On the police website, there's a section dedicated to LPRs that in fact has an email address that is specifically for LPR related issues, comments, concerns, things of that nature. Precinct Commander, Precinct Coco, any of those would be good places to reach out.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I'm going to go to Councilmember Gamble. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to point out in the data that was collected from MMPD regarding the pilot program, it does state that out of the 71 million license plates that were read that resulted in 112 arrests. Out of those 112 arrests, however, 103 were linked to local crime history, and out of those 103 individuals, they had a total of 829 arrests on 1,593 charges. So while there were 112 arrests of individuals, the charges of those, out of that 112, 103 were local had local criminal history. And of those 103, there were 1,593 charges that resulted in 87 violent felony charges, 30 robbery charges, 128 auto thefts, 50 burglaries, 87 misdemeanor assault charges, 371 drug charges, and 47 gun charges. So while the arrest may seem low out of the number of reads, which the number of reads is anyone who goes past those license plate readers, but only those that have been identified in the crime were acted on. So just wanted to make that clear. Also, I do have a question for the Community Oversight Board. Out of those 112 arrests, or we can go down to the 103 that have local affiliation, were there any complaints or identifying factors that came to your office in regards to misidentification or police brutality or any of those type of things? That is something that we need to be aware of if there were such cases. And so I just would like for someone from the Community Oversight Board to address that.
Yeah, hi. Dave Kiley, I'm the Assistant Director of MNCO. So the way that we collect complaints, individuals can submit complaints to the COB related to individual officer misconduct. And I'll say at the outset, no, we did not receive any individual complaints as to misconduct resulting from an LPR stop or misconduct related to the use of an LPR stop. But I'd kind of put a big asterisk on that, because what we did receive at various public meetings was a lot of concern about the implementation generally. So specifically the implementation, the placement in high minority areas, low income areas. That was expressed to us many times by members of the public, and kind of the creation of, I don't want to sound alarmist, but surveillance, the level of surveillance, the scale of surveillance, and the placement of it. So I would say that is the feedback we heard from the community, but that is not in the form of any kind of misconduct complaint or anything like that.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, because as we continue to look at a permanent implementation of this, I think education is the key in making people or having people understand how these cameras are being used, how they're being placed, and also having those advisory committees involved in the placement moving forward will hopefully address some of that. Do you have any other suggestions as to how we can address concerns that the community has about the implementation in general?
It's a big question. I would come back to some of what I believe Councilmember Henderson was saying, or some of the questions earlier in the previous committee about the precinct advisory groups. We know very little about that as an organization, and I think the questions demonstrated that the council and the city generally don't really know much about what these groups look like. And we are all for the police having those types of groups and gathering. And, I think that's great. That kind of outreach is great. But I would be wary of thinking that is a replacement for us. And when procurement was talking about subject matter expertise and things like that, our LPR report was prepared by 3 of our staff members who have master's degrees from Vanderbilt. In our staff, we have about 20 years of criminal defense legal experience. And so I do think we have things to say about this, and I wish that the department would be a bit more inviting and a bit more proactive about involving us. I do not think that precinct advisory groups that are, there's no transparency. We do not know who's on them. We do not know. It sounds like the department is recruiting those people and selecting those people, and that's fine. It's not that they can't do that. It's just that we should also be included. And that's all that, that we're saying about that.
Thank you. I would like to say for the record, we have an opportunity to be aware. The information has been shared with the council members, and so the council members should be aware of who's serving on these advisory committees within their districts. However, I do agree that involving the Community Oversight Board would be an additional collaboration that would be useful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Sepulveda?
Thank you, Chair. My question is for the Community Oversight Board and Turk. So I guess piggybacking off of Councilmember Gamble's question, I guess it's what additional protections would you all recommend before the implementation of LPRs? And then what additional, questions could be answered if there was more time to research LPRs? And that last question is more Community Oversight Board, but it's for the Community Oversight Board and Turk, specifically regarding some of the concerns from community members.
So I think I want to be careful because it is not our place to tell this body to vote one way or the other, right? And so if the question is what policies there are, I mean, obviously our concerns are around the placement. When you look at those heat maps, which are concentrated in what was quadrant A, which are, low income, non-white areas of the city, that is concerning. And so I can't stand here and tell the police department, oh, if you do X, Y, or Z, it'll be better. Personally, I don't know that saturating the city with LPRs is a good thing, but I'm not here to tell you that. I think that what I am hearing from the department, though, is that I do not feel those concerns are being taken as seriously as they should be. And, when I feel like a lot of the questions here that have been asked about that, and I have nothing but respect for my colleagues over here from the department, but when you ask them about the placement in those areas, they don't seem to get it. They don't seem to get that people in these communities are made uncomfortable by being placed under surveillance. And you can say that it's justified, and you can say that there's a reason for it, and you can say that it's helpful to your police work, and that is all fine and well. But if the end of your thought about that is, but we're going to do it anyway, and there's no real response to those concerns, it's frankly not my place to tell them what to do about that, but it is my place to tell them that a lot of people are upset about it. And having that kind of surveillance system in just those areas is very much going to erode trust, and it's going to erode people's confidence in the process, and it's going to erode their, it just creates worry, and it creates concern, and it creates, obviously, we all know what that looks like. So that's the best answer I can give you.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councilwoman Judith from Turk. So I think it's really important to also consider the sort of social political moment that we're in, right? These policies are not being passed in a vacuum. And so for us, the bigger question is, what is the role? How will this actually function given the moment that we're in? And given the relationship with the state, I think we have to be really honest about what happens once Nashville puts in place the infrastructure, right? Because we know that after we make this decision, the state can come back in and change the law and restrict our ability to negotiate or restrict our ability to actually have safeguards for this policy. And so, again, I think we've been having a lot of conversations about how do we make this better, but ultimately, if we willingly put in place the infrastructure, after that, in some ways, it's out of our hands because this is what the state can do. And we have to be honest about our current relationship and our current moment and what this will serve given the political realities.
Great, thank you. My last question is for Dylan, specifically regarding the data. I think I remember, and I wrote this down from the last meeting, so I don't know if we have updated data. So from all of the LPR hits, from the verified hits, it seemed that well, from all of the LPR reads, from the verified hits, it was 0.0033% that were verified hits from all of the license plates read.
So that is from a specific 10-day stretch that we were able to get that data from. So May 7th to May 17th are where those numbers come from. Yes.
So ideally, right, or do you have the information from the entirety of the pilot as to the number of license plates that were read and then the percentage that were verified hits?
Yes. So from the entire LPR program, we just heard that there were 71 million reads, which resulted in, once again, if we consult table 3 on page 4, led to a total of 119. Oh, I'm sorry. That was from the 10-day stretch. If we consult table 2 on page 3, that 71 million reads led to a total of 1,316 verified hits.
So what percentage is that?
Okay, wait, let me do some mental math real quick because we just got the 71 million number. But that's in the, I believe, the thousands of the percent one. So 71 million reads. Let's see. In terms of arrests, so we've heard that there are 112 out of those 71 million reads. That is a arrest rate of 0.000016%. And then when we do that for verified hits, all right, we're looking at 0.0019%.
Thank you. I guess my question to the committee is that worth people's privacy? To my colleague's point, we started this legislation because of drag racing. And during that period of time, we also had MMPD implement specific, groups internally within precincts to try and address that. They had an undercover group. They monitor social media accounts. And so that was already successful in itself because I would see online the number of cars that were confiscated from drag racing. And I guess I would want the information from MMPD as to specific crimes, the rate at which they were being addressed before LPRs and during this 6-month pilot.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other comments, questions on the resolution as amended? Councilmember Porterfield, briefly.
Thank you, Chair. Briefly, this is for MMPD. Early on in the LPR conversation, there were some concerns that were addressed, that were brought up around collecting First Amendment related activity and immigration enforcement and how that information will be shared from outside agencies that may subpoena Metro government and MMPD. Do we know can MMPD tell us what their policies are with regards to sharing data, LPR data with outside agencies?
Yes, ma'am. Chris Gilder, Metro Police Department. So we implemented the provisions that you all enacted in the ordinance with respect to data sharing, which in short, not verbatim, basically say that they have to fall within the parameters that we're allowed to use the data for. And as I think we discussed in the last committee meeting, that includes a form being submitted by the requesting agency that has to outline what it is they're looking for, why they want it. We have to verify that it complies with our ordinance, basically that we could look for it ourselves if it were something that occurred here. And then we can go into the to the historical records to look for that. The thing is, though, there's only 10 days worth of data. So at the end of 10 days, that record is completely gone and cannot be retrieved.
Thank you. And then one last question. I understand that some of the arrests may have hit repeat offenders. So outside of hidden repeat offenders, is there any data or evidence that supports or shows that LPRs have prevented any crimes?
I don't know how I can show any technique prevents a crime from occurring. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm misunderstanding your question.
No, I think you're right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sepulveda.
Thank you, Chair. Question for Turk, or anyone else who has the answer to this. If ICE puts in a subpoena request for data, how long do they need? What's the timeline for them to get that information? Is it less than 10 days? Is it more than 10 days? Like, is there any information as to how quickly they could retrieve that data once they put in a request through the courts and the court approves?
I am not sure of the exact timeline. I can follow up with you all and make sure you have that information, but I'm assuming it's fairly quickly. But again, I'm not sure exactly what that timeline is.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Appreciate everybody's engagement on this. It's been a great discussion. All right, seeing none. Briefly, thank you, Councilmember Benedict.
Thank you, Chair. If I'm out of order, let me know. I just got in the room. The cameras that are in place today, are those the ones that are going to be used after the new RFP?
Deputy Chief Gilder.
I don't know which cameras will be used after the RFP because that will be dependent upon the procurement process and who is selected as a vendor. So
they're still in place right now, though, that they've not been taken down?
They were turned off, and the vendors were advised they can collect their cameras. I don't know if any are still up or not, but they're not collecting data.
Okay, we don't know if the vendors did take them down or not, though?
I haven't gone around to each site to check, so I don't know if you have.
That's up to the vendor to take it down.
They were notified the pilot ended and they could remove their equipment. I'm sure they probably want their equipment back, so I'd say they're probably in the process of doing that if they hadn't already.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
That was brief enough.
That was great. Thank you so much. Any others? Comments, questions? All right, seeing none. So resolution as amended, all in favor? Say aye. Any against? Any abstentions? All right, so resolution as amended passes 7 in favor, 0 against with 1 abstention. Thank you, everyone. That concludes this committee meeting.